The wind howled across the Wyoming plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the scent of snow and something else. Something darker. Elias Boone pulled his worn coat tighter as he stepped out of his cabin, the wooden door creaking against the November cold of 1892. What he would find in the next few minutes would change everything he thought he knew about forgiveness and redemption. The old rancher had lived alone on these 200 acres for 7 years now, ever since Martha passed. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of ranch work and his time as a bugler in the Union Army, gripped the lantern as he made his way toward the barn. The cattle had been restless all evening, their low mooing carrying an edge of panic that made his skin crawl. At 67, Elias had seen enough to know when something was wrong. The lantern light danced across the frost-covered ground as he approached the barn, his breath forming small clouds in the bitter air. That's when he heard it. A soft whimper, barely audible above the wind, coming from behind the hay bales stacked against the barn's eastern wall. Elias froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. In 30 years of living on this land, he had learned to distinguish between the sounds of injured animals and something far more dangerous. He raised the lantern higher, the golden light pushing back the shadows. There, curled against the rough wooden planks, was a young girl. But this wasn't any settler's child. Her long black hair was matted with blood, and her clothing, what remained of it, bore the intricate beadwork and leather craftsmanship of the Cheyenne. Her breathing was shallow, labored, and a dark stain spread across her left shoulder where a bullet had found its mark. Elias's mind raced back 23 years to a moment that had haunted him every single day since. Another young native, a boy no older than this girl, bleeding out beside a creek while Elias and his patrol rode past. The boy's eyes had met his for just a moment, pleading, desperate. But orders were orders, and Elias had turned away. 3 days later, he learned the boy had died alone by that creek. The girl's eyes fluttered open, dark as midnight and filled with terror. She tried to scramble away, her small hands clawing at the frozen earth, but her strength was gone. Blood seeped through her fingers as she pressed them against her wound. In the lantern light, Elias could see she was perhaps 16, maybe 17, with the sharp cheekbones and proud bearing of her people, even in her weakened state. Slowly, deliberately, Elias set the lantern down and raised both hands, palms facing her. He had learned enough Cheyenne words during his army days to know what might calm her. "Peace," he said softly, using the Cheyenne word hots. His voice, roughened by years of calling to cattle across vast distances, gentle to barely above a whisper. "I will not hurt you." The girl's breathing quickened, her eyes darting between Elias's face and the rifle that hung over his shoulder. She spoke rapidly in Cheyenne, words he couldn't understand but whose meaning was clear enough. She was telling him to stay back, that she would rather die than be taken captive. Tears mixed with the dirt and blood on her cheeks, and Elias felt something break open inside his chest. Without taking his eyes off her, he slowly unslung his rifle and placed it on the ground, far enough away that she could see he meant no threat. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He began to hum, low and soft, a melody Martha used to love, one he had played on his bugle during quiet moments between battles. The girl's rapid breathing began to slow, her terrified eyes never leaving his face. "My name is Elias," he said, mixing English with the few Cheyenne words he remembered. "Elias Boone. This is my land, my home. You are safe here." He gestured toward the cabin, its windows glowing warm yellow in the darkness. "Medicine. Food. Warmth." The girl studied his weathered face for a long moment, as if reading the truth written in the lines around his eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but he caught one word clearly. "Ayasha." She was telling him her name. Elias nodded slowly. "Ayasha." The name felt strange on his tongue, but right somehow. "Can you walk, Ayasha? Can you make it to the cabin?" Ayasha tried to stand but collapsed immediately, her legs buckling beneath her. The bullet wound in her shoulder had taken more from her than just blood. Elias moved closer, his movements deliberate and slow, like approaching a wounded hawk. He had seen enough injured animals to know that panic could kill faster than any wound. "Easy now," he murmured, crouching down until he was at her eye level. The lantern light caught the fear still flickering in her dark eyes, but something else was there too. A kind of resigned exhaustion that told him she had been running for days, maybe weeks. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, and her clothes, torn and blood-stained, spoke of a journey through harsh terrain. Elias pulled off his thick coat and held it out to her. For a moment, she just stared at it, as if it might transform into a trap. Then, shivering from the November cold, she allowed him to drape it around her shoulders. The coat swallowed her small frame, and he could feel how thin she had become, how the bones of her shoulders pressed sharp against the fabric. Getting her to the cabin took nearly an hour. Ayesha could barely walk, leaning heavily against his shoulder as they made their way across the frozen ground. Each step sent pain shooting through her wounded shoulder, and more than once she had to stop, breathing hard, her face pale in the moonlight. Elias found himself humming that same melody, the one Martha used to love, and noticed how it seemed to steady her breathing. Inside the cabin, the warmth hit them like a wall. Elias had kept the fire burning in the stone hearth, and the orange light danced across the simple wooden furniture Martha had chosen when they first settled here. Ayesha's eyes moved quickly around the room, taking in the rifle rack by the door, the photographs of Elias in his Union uniform, the small collection of books on the shelf. Her gaze lingered on a delicate china teacup sitting on the table, a remnant of Martha's more refined past. Elias guided her to the chair closest to the fire, and she sank into it gratefully. In the better light, he could see the full extent of her injuries. Besides the bullet wound, there were cuts on her arms and face, probably from thorns and rocks during her flight. Her hands were scraped raw, and her feet, visible through holes in her worn moccasins, were bloody and swollen. "I need to look at that shoulder," he said gently, gesturing toward her wound. Ayesha pulled the coat tighter around herself and shook her head sharply. The message was clear: she would not remove her clothing in front of him. Elias nodded understanding and turned away, giving her privacy as he gathered supplies from the cabinet where Martha used to keep her sewing materials. Clean cloth, a bottle of whiskey, needle, and thread. His hands shook slightly as he laid everything out on the table. It had been years since he had tended to a gunshot wound, not since the war, and never on someone so young. When he turned back, Ayesha had managed to slip her arm out of her torn shirt without exposing herself, keeping the coat draped carefully around her. The bullet wound was worse than he had hoped but better than he had feared. The bullet had passed clean through, missing the bone, but infection was already setting in around the edges. "This will hurt," he warned, holding up the bottle of whiskey. Ayesha met his eyes and nodded once, her jaw set with determination that reminded him of the Cheyenne warriors he had faced in battle. But this was different. This was healing, not destroying. The next hour tested both their resolve. Elias cleaned the wound as gently as he could, but Ayesha bit down on a piece of leather to keep from crying out. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she never made a sound. When he began to stitch the entry wound, she finally spoke, a string of Cheyenne words that he recognized as either prayers or curses, possibly both. "Almost finished," he murmured, and began to hum again. This time, she joined him, her voice barely audible but pure and clear. The melody intertwined with his rougher tones, creating something he had never heard before. Something that spoke of pain acknowledged and healing begun. When the last stitch was tied, Ayesha slumped forward, exhausted. Elias brought her water and the last of Martha's homemade bread, watching as she ate slowly, carefully, like someone who had not known when her next meal might come. "Why?" she asked suddenly, the English word clear despite her accent. She gestured between them, between his kindness and what she clearly expected from white men. Elias was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I failed someone once," he said finally. "Someone your age. I let him die when I could have helped." He looked at her directly. "I won't make that mistake again." Ayesha studied his weathered face, reading the truth in the lines around his eyes, the weight of old guilt in his shoulders. Slowly, she nodded. Whatever test she had been conducting, he had passed. As the night deepened and the fire burned lower, an unusual sound began outside. A rushing, like wind through tall grass, but there was no grass here. only the bare fields waiting for spring planting. Dawn came slowly across the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Elias woke in his chair beside the dying fire, his neck stiff from sleeping upright. He had not wanted to leave Ayesha alone through the night, not with her fever and the way she had whispered restlessly in Cheyenne during her brief moments of sleep. She was awake now, sitting up carefully and looking toward the window where the first light was creeping through the curtains. Her fever had broken sometime during the night, and though she was still pale, her eyes were clear and alert. When she saw him watching, she spoke a single word in Cheyenne that he somehow understood meant gratitude. "How do you feel?" he asked, standing slowly and working the kinks out of his shoulders. She touched her bandaged wound gingerly and nodded, then pointed toward the door. She wanted to go outside. Elias helped her to her feet, noting how much steadier she seemed. The night of rest and warmth had done more good than he had hoped. Together, they walked to the cabin door, and when he opened it, both of them stopped in complete silence. The field beyond his cabin, all 40 acres of it, was covered in feathers. Not scattered randomly, but laid out like a vast white carpet that caught the morning light and made it dance. Thousands upon thousands of feathers, pristine white with touches of silver gray, covered every inch of the frozen ground as far as they could see. Elias stepped outside, Ayesha close behind him. There was no sign of any birds, living or dead. No disturbance in the snow around the edges of the feather field. No tracks of any kind. Just this impossible blanket of perfect feathers stretching toward the horizon. "This isn't possible," Elias whispered, kneeling to pick up one of the feathers. It was real enough, soft and warm despite the cold morning air. A flight feather from what looked like a snow goose, but larger than any he had ever seen. Ayesha moved past him, stepping carefully among the feathers. Her face had changed completely. The weariness and pain had been replaced by something approaching awe. She knelt down and gathered a handful of feathers, bringing them to her face and breathing in their scent. When she looked up at Elias, her eyes were bright with tears. "White Buffalo woman," she said in English, her voice barely above a whisper. Then she spoke rapidly in Cheyenne, her hands gesturing toward the feathers, toward the sky, toward him. Though he could not understand her words, the meaning was unmistakable. This was sacred. This was a sign. She began to sing then, her voice rising clear and strong in the morning air. It was unlike anything Elias had ever heard, a melody that seemed to come from the earth itself, from the wind in the mountains and the vast sky overhead. Other voices seemed to join hers, though there was no one else around. The very air vibrated with the music. As she sang, Ayesha moved among the feathers with careful steps, gathering them into bundles. She handed one bundle to Elias, and when their fingers touched, he felt something pass between them. Not romantic love, but something deeper. Understanding. Forgiveness. The kind of peace he had not known since Martha died. "My grandmother told me stories," Ayesha said when her song ended. Her English was better than she had let him believe. When the spirits forgive, when healing begins, they send white feathers. A blessing. She looked directly at him. "For you. For what you did not do before, and what you chose to do now." Elias felt his throat close up. In all his 67 years, through war and loss and the hardships of frontier life, he had never experienced anything like this moment. "I don't understand," he managed to say. Ayesha smiled for the first time since he had found her. "You carried guilt for 23 winters. You could have turned away from me like you turned away before. But you chose differently. The spirits see. They forgive. They bless." Together, they spent the morning gathering feathers. Ayesha showed him how to bundle them properly, how to separate the different types for different purposes. Flight feathers for ceremonies, down feathers for healing, tail feathers for prayers. She worked with practiced hands, and Elias realized this was knowledge passed down through generations, sacred wisdom that she was sharing with him. As the sun climbed higher, the mystery deepened. No tracks led to or from the feather field. No disturbance marked where any birds might have landed or taken off. It was as if the feathers had simply appeared during the night, a gift from the sky itself. "Will you teach me?" Elias asked as they worked side by side. "About your people? About what this means?" Ayesha nodded slowly. "And you will teach me your songs? The ones you hummed?" "Yes," he said. "We have time." For the first time in years, Elias Boone truly believed they did. 3 weeks had passed since the morning of the feathers, and the Wyoming winter had settled in with the kind of cold that made every breath visible. But inside the cabin, warmth had taken root in ways that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the stone hearth. Ayesha's shoulder had healed cleanly, leaving only a thin white scar that she wore without shame. She moved through the cabin with growing confidence, her initial wariness replaced by something Elias had never expected to see again in his lonely home: belonging. She had taken over the cooking, transforming simple ingredients into meals that reminded him why food could be more than just sustenance. Her presence had breathed life back into rooms that had been silent for too long. In return, Elias had shared everything he knew about surviving the harsh Wyoming winters, about reading weather patterns and caring for livestock. But more importantly, he had kept his promise to teach her his songs. Every evening after the chores were done, they would sit by the fire, and he would hum the melodies he remembered from his army days, from his childhood, from the quiet moments he had shared with Martha. Ayesha proved to be a quick learner with an extraordinary voice. She would repeat each melody once, twice, and then it became hers, transformed by something uniquely Cheyenne. She taught him songs in return, ancient melodies that told stories of buffalo hunts and star patterns, of women who became warriors and men who learned to listen to the wind. Tonight was different, though. Ayesha had been preparing for something all day, gathering the special feathers they had collected that first morning, arranging them in patterns that meant something in her culture. When darkness fell and they settled by the fire, she looked at him with an expression that was both serious and hopeful. "Elias," she said, her English now flowing naturally between them. "There is a ceremony. For healing. For forgiveness. My grandmother taught me, but I never thought I would need to perform it for someone outside our people." She had laid the white and gray feathers in a circle around them, creating a sacred space within the simple cabin. In the firelight, the feathers seemed to glow with their own inner light, just as they had that first morning in the field. "The ceremony requires truth," she continued. "You must speak the name of the one you failed. You must let the guilt go to the spirits, so it cannot poison you anymore." Elias felt his chest tighten. In 3 weeks of growing closeness, he had never told her the details of that day 23 years ago. "His name was Two Eagles," he said quietly. "He was wounded, bleeding by a creek near Fort Robinson. 15, maybe 16 years old. My commanding officer ordered us to keep moving, said we couldn't risk an ambush. I looked back once and saw him trying to crawl to the water." Ayesha nodded slowly, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Two Eagles was my brother." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. He stared at her, his mind reeling. "Your brother? I was 5 when he died. I remember him singing to me, teaching me the songs of our people." Her voice was steady, but tears traced silver paths down her cheeks. "For years, I hated all white soldiers. When I first saw your uniform in the photographs, I wanted to run. But then you hummed those songs, and I heard something different. I heard someone who carried pain just like mine." The fire crackled in the silence between them. Elias felt 23 years of guilt threatening to crush him. "Ayesha, No," she said firmly. "This is why the spirits brought me here. Not for me to punish you, but for both of us to heal. My brother's spirit has been waiting. Waiting for you to forgive yourself so he could move on to the spirit world in peace." She began to sing then, a melody unlike any she had taught him before. It started low and mournful, acknowledging pain and loss. But as her voice rose, it transformed into something triumphant, something that spoke of forgiveness and new beginnings. The feathers around them seemed to rustle without any wind, and for a moment, Elias could swear he heard another voice joining hers. A young man's voice, strong and clear. When the song ended, the cabin felt different. Lighter somehow. The weight that Elias had carried in his chest for over 2 decades was simply gone. "He forgives you," Ayesha whispered. "And now you must forgive yourself." They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned lower. Outside, snow began to fall, but inside, surrounded by sacred feathers and the bonds of an unlikely family, 2 wounded souls had finally found their way home. "Will you stay?" Elias asked as the last flames danced in the hearth. "Through the winter? Through whatever comes after?" Ayesha smiled, her hand finding his weathered one. "Where else would I go? You still have so many songs to teach me." And in that moment, Elias Boone understood what the Field of Feathers had really meant. Not just forgiveness, but rebirth. Not just healing, but hope. The old rancher and the wounded Cheyenne girl had saved each other in ways that mattered more than blood or bullets. They had saved each other's souls. If this story of healing and forgiveness touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of second chances. What moments of unexpected grace have changed your life? Share your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales of human connection that remind us what truly matters. Until next time, keep believing in the possibility of redemption.